Come on, you sissy, be a man. Don't cry. Grow some muscle, you puny wimp. Real men are ripped. Kick his ass. What? You ate a salad? Fucking rabbit food. Real men eat meat, and only meat, cooked over a fire on a stick. You want that woman? Fucking fuck her. What? She said no? So what? Inside every no is a yes waiting to come out. You just gotta get it out of her by getting it in her. Know what I mean? We all know what toxic masculinity is. Or do we? Why is it suddenly a thing the media is obsessed with? And is it really a new phenomenon at all? Where does it come from? Is it simply an inherent aspect of being a male? How is it taught? How is it reinforced? How is it represented in the stories we read and watch? How do we diffuse it? What is the antidote? Join me and my intrepid co-host, Jenn Zuko, as well as some other guests, as we embark on another semi-drunken exploration of the intersection of literature and society as we discuss problematic, toxic masculinity tropes. So
hey,
here we
hi.
are.
Nice to see you.
How's it going?
That's great.
So here we are, problematic toxic masculinity trope number 4. And I do have some questions about the tale of the nerd and the neckbeard. But as I was reading through the notes again, I realized that when you in note number 3, where you now, I guess just for the sake of the crowd who's going to be listening.
Oh yes, we should explain. So tropes numbers 1 through 3.
1 through 3 had completed essays to start
and
off.
Published, and also published.
So that you all could
edited.
read and follow along. From 4 to 7, we're working off of outlines and notes that Jenn has made because those essays have not been written. So this will be kind of a chance for us to flesh out these tropes.
Yeah, I'm excited about this.
And kind of pre-discuss any of the potential holes that we may or may not have found in the previous ones.
Yeah, I'm excited about this. It's going to give me a good solid base to write the articles on instead of having the articles already. This will be really good. It'll give me some good ideas.
From point number 3, where your definition of the trope, my first note was a giant question mark.
Okay.
Because
I mean, I can put it pithily if you would like.
Oh.
I can probably put it more pithily than my notes are.
So, well, I have it since you usually like me to try and define it and you tell me what to...
Okay. You tell me what you think it is and then I'll tell you what I actually mean it to be.
Riffing off of your definition, this is the tale of the nerd and the neckbeard is the tale of a weak sub-male who... And then that's kind of where it stops because your definition doesn't give what he does, just that he's a sub-male who's smart and subservient.
Oh, I think I do. Here, let me look at the notes too.
Other than him being, getting into a dorkable misogyny and all this stuff like this. I mean, but the thing is that I'm assuming that since the primary touchstone of this is the 1984 movie Revenge of the Nerds, and then our most recent epic series of badness, the Big Bang Theory, that is basically, this is the tale of a weak sub-male who, through subterfuge and intelligence, gets the girl.
Sometimes. So it says, soft, weak, super smart, socially inept, subservient to men and women alike.
Yep.
They're the opposite, and this is the main thing. It's about the intelligence and the cultivation of traditionally non-masculine pursuits.
Right.
And they're opposite of the hegemonic masculine. So they're portrayed as sort of the opposite of, like, say, the jock. You have jock versus nerd.
Right. So
you have the nerds that are all about, like, computer programming and D&D and all the kind of geeky stuff, and then you have the neckbeard who he's not your classic skinny pocket protector guy who's sort of portrayed as a little bit more effeminate. The neckbeard is more the overweight, the computer gamer from South Park who like lives at his mom's basement, basically.
Right.
So that's just another version. It's the nerd and the neckbeard. They're both considered sub-male, meaning that they don't live up to the impossible hegemonic masculine ideal.
Right.
They're portrayed as the opposite. And if they do get the girl, which they often don't, but if they do, it's by tricks, because they can't, like the stereotypical masculine ideal, they can't actually get sex the normal masculine way. They have to do it via trickery or the bed switching that we were just talking about.
Right.
So that's the main thing. And what will happen with I was kind of wondering whether, like, in Pop Culture Detective, he talks about the adorkable misogyny as being a trope. I was thinking maybe it's a subtrope of this, but I don't think it is. Actually, I think what it is it's a symptom of the nerd and the neckbeard. The adorkable misogyny is just something that happens with this trope character. This trope character is very anti-feminine. It's very afraid of being anything close to feminine, because they are feminized because they're sort of a sub-male.
Right.
Does that make sense?
Yeah. I mean, when I first watched that video, I thought, oh, that's Jenn's trope. I mean, I think the essay you would have to have gotten a little bit more into that arena, because that adorkable misogyny thing, that kind of hits all the high points of kind of what this trope is.
That, and that the nerds bully themselves. They bully each other even more severely than they themselves have been bullied.
Right.
So they have this kind of like constant one-upmanship, and they sort of denigrate any of their fellow sub-males that are less masculine than they are.
Right.
So it's this kind of cycle of bullying.
They also denigrate them for their intelligence, which also makes them sub-male, but then they also value that, and so they have to smash each other around because of that.
Right. That's like what power is within the nerd and the neckbeard, but it's not considered a hegemonic masculine ideal. Like the big dumb meathead is still considered this sort of impossible ideal. So, and so they'll bully each other even worse than they themselves have been bullied. So especially if you look at the Big Bang Theory show, you'll see them, they treat each other like shit. Yeah. They treat the women in their lives like even more shit, because the women are on an even lower sort of position in that hierarchy than they are even. And the Pop Culture Detective videos talk about Raj as being the most effeminate of the four main characters, and therefore the most sort of bullied within the group.
I actually never watched The Big Bang Theory.
I watched a little bit at the very beginning, and I just immediately wasn't really super into it.
How did it stay on as long as it did?
I have no idea. I think it might have something to do with Schadenfreude. Like, we just like seeing all of these like sub males give each other shit. But wasn't the show the sort of love of seeing everyone get punished and everyone punishing each other? I don't know. Who was the fan base for the show? I don't know. That's the thing. Like, the whole thing was supposed to be like a celebration of the nerd character, but the nerds are horrible. Yeah. Like, there's no one that's likable. Nobody's behavior is okay in that show. There's dumb blondes and there's the adorkable misogynists, and that's it. So you saw like the first season, right? The first couple seasons, I think. I kind of like looked at it on and off within the first couple seasons. It's been on for like, how many seasons is it now at this point? I mean, it's been
I think it's done.
It is done, but like, how many seasons did it end up being?
Oh.
And like 3 out of the 4 guys end up married. It's so weird.
If it was on 2 seasons, it was long enough.
Only 2? No, it's been on for like 10 years.
No, I know. What I'm saying is 2 seasons was long enough. Oh, yeah. Yeah, it was long enough for me to see what I needed to see. I thought at first that's not to say I didn't see a few episodes, but it was like, I can't do it. I can't do it.
Yeah, no, exactly. And like, that's the thing that makes that show in particular, as an example of the nerd and the neckbeard, it makes that show even more insidious. The fact that it's so popular, and like you, I have no idea who the audience must be for that show. But the fact that it's like supposedly trying to celebrate alternate forms of masculinity, right? Like we have four
Right.
characters, one of them of color, who are non-traditional male characters, and you'd think that would be a good thing. And you have
Right.
like one of the two dumb blondes in the show is actually not a dumb blonde, but she's like a neurobiologist.
Right.
So like you would think that would be refreshing and great and a celebration of alternate types, but instead it just descends into this even more damaging stereotype.
It was Chuck Lorre that did that.
Mm-hmm. And it's just the homophobia and the misogyny of that show. And it's because all of the nerd characters are self-bullying even more severely than they get bullied by anyone who's more of a stereotypical masculine type.
12 seasons.
12 seasons. Yeah. Wow. How many episodes per season? Like 20?
Probably not that, because there were only 279 episodes.
Oh, okay. I didn't know if that were like the classic sort of CBS kind of thing. Yeah, so I don't know. This is why this particular trope is such a problem, because we're supposed to be like, hopefully if you have a character that's a nerd,
right,
or if you have a character that's a neckbeard, you can hopefully like be like, oh great, so this is great. This is not, your sort of hegemonic masculine ideal, which is impossible to attain.
Right.
So good. We'll have alternate forms of masculinity. We'll have like, more of a realistic thing, and we won't have hyper masculine behaviors all the time.
Right.
But instead it's like, it's not that at all.
Well, okay. So here's the thing that I have the problem with throwing in the neckbeard on this.
Oh, okay.
And so ultimately the nerd would be if alternate masculinities were acceptable, the nerd would be acceptable, would be this would be a smart, intelligent, sensitive, social, because they'd be out in the world. Whereas I don't think
the opposite of the go big or go home, right? So the alternate forms of physicality,
right? Because there are a lot of nerds who are, in the real world, pro-feminist.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Right.
Most of actually all the nerds I know are feminist.
But the neckbeard, I was always a little concerned. I never really knew what that word meant, and I looked it up. And the neckbeard is kind of irredeemable.
Is he kind of more of a bro? Is he like the Gamergate that we just don't lump in?
These are your denizens. The neckbeard, the way after doing a little bit, so I started researching neckbeard, that term, and I ended up, learning about.
Did you shave your neck after?
No, I ended up learning about. I ended up learning about the manosphere. Do you know about the manosphere?
Oh, the manosphere, yes. Mm-hmm.
That's the alt-right. This is where this is the alt-right version of manhood. So the neckbeard is part of that group. These are these kind of antisocial, keyboard commandos, what Mark Maron would call the army of unfuckable hate nerds.
Right. Mm-hmm.
So
yes, that's true.
I would junk
the Gamergate guys.
Junk the neckbeard off of there, because this is not something they are not. The neckbeard does not present the way the nerd does. Someone who would be an alternative masculinity who is adorkable.
Right,
that's the problem with the nerd version of this, with that adorkable misogyny, is that these characters appear to be on the surface likable, but hide beneath that likable, glossy, likable surface of a lot of misogyny, whereas the
and we
Neckbeard,
got
the
taught- we
Neckbeard
got
is
taught
just
that
pure misogyny.
hate, right?
These-
So the nerd then is more like, hey, misogyny is no big deal. It's pretty much harmless most of the time.
Right, it's
but
harmless because
the Neckbeard is like fucking.
they've weaponized their
threatening
misogyny.
Sarkeesian
They've
and all this shit.
weaponized their geekdom. They're the ones standing at the gate of gamer culture. They're the ones that are on 4chan sharing rape memes. They're the ones. Have you been on 4chan? Have you fished around on there?
I can't handle 4chan. No, I don't.
So the Neckbeards, these are the guys that refer to Elliot Rodger, the Isla Vista shooter.
Yeah.
They refer to him as the supreme gentleman.
Yes, I knew that. Yeah,
right.
I knew that.
These are the guys that, when you look at all these other so-called incels that go out and commit violence, these are the heroes of the Neckbeards. And so I think for this trope to come into focus, better in focus, we got to shed the Neckbeard. That's got to be a different trope. Or that's
not even okay.
That's not even a media trope because the media is not putting that into fictional play except as a villain.
Well, you do have like the comic book guy in Simpsons and the gamer guy in South Park. Like he does appear as a character, although he is much less harmful in media than he is in real life.
Right, but he's also not portrayed as a hero. He's not in those situations. He's not portrayed as something to look up to or aspire to. In fact, the comic book guy in South Park in particular is one that I was thinking of. The chubby comic book store guy.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking. The same character in South Park.
He's not someone that's presented as the main lead. He's a secondary character, one that is out there. And so I don't know that I think we can shed the Neckbeard from this particular trope. That's something else.
But then and the Neckbeard is often infantilized in media. So do you think so you're absolutely right that the nerd and the Neckbeard, there's no and.
Right.
This trope is about the nerd then.
Right.
So you're absolutely right about that. That's totally correct. It's going to help me to focus this a lot more.
Yep.
So do you think then that the Neckbeard is a subtrope of this because he is a form of geek?
Maybe.
Or
maybe, but it's again, it would have to be.
Because you're right, I can't put them on the same sort of plane. They don't function the same way.
They don't function the same way. They don't, and the nerd, even though he is swimming in misogyny, because your other examples were 16 Candles, Revenge of the Nerds. In that stuff, the nerd or the geek, particularly in 16 Candles, yes, they have various misogynistic traits or whatever, but at the end, they get the girl. They're rewarded for their adorkable misogyny. Neckbeards are, at least so far, have not been cast as or portrayed as, presented as heroes in fictional
Well, I wouldn't
media.
think the nerds aren't either, right? I mean, nerds are always kind of like on the sidelines.
Well, 16 Candles, the nerd is one of the co-leads. You have Molly Ringwald. What was his name? What was the actor's name?
Cusack? No. Who's in 16 Candles?
Who played the geek in 16 Candles?
Oh, the blonde kid. Anthony Michael Hall?
Yes, Anthony Michael Hall. No, even though they are not the primary leads, but then of course you have to trot in Revenge of the Nerds.
Well, but the
those characters
of the nerds is that they are made protagonists when they're never protagonists.
Right.
Do you know what I mean?
And so they have to get the girl, and that's part of what this trope is that, it has to be, in all of these cases that we've looked at before, the trope has to be something that somebody wants to emulate. Wrong, and it turns out bad, right? So the whole, James Bond,
sort of thing.
Right? And the Neckbeard does not present a bait and switch situation.
No, that's true.
Right.
You're right about that.
Whereas the nerd does. Act like this adorkable person, and you'll get the girl. You can still be misogynistic; it'll turn into thing, but you'll still get the girl because Revenge of the Nerds is about them.
Harmless. Yeah.
Right. They also showed footage from Back to the Future.
Right.
And there's another one, the adorkable misogynist, this nerd character who in the end gets the girl, even though he's, you know, a creepy peeping Tom stalker. Right.
Yeah, no, you're right about that. Yeah. And the Neckbeard has absolutely zero.
Right. So I would
even a hint.
Yeah, because when the Neckbeard appears, he's angry women, you know, and doesn't want anything to have anything to do with them, or is so desperate to have something to do with them that he's angry at them.
And violent towards them.
Whereas the nerd is like, girls, let's look up their skirts. Yeah. Let's raid the panties. Woo! We're having fun like big guys, you know?
Yeah, right. Totally. Okay.
That's
true. No, that's a good point.
Because and at this point,
Panty raid.
And listen, I have a certain soft spot for the Revenge of the Nerds movies.
Well, of course you do.
Because at our age, for our age group, all our faves are problematic.
Of course.
All of them. Right?
They're all, oh my God, any of those romantic rom-coms from the 80s. Oh, goodness.
The teen romantic comedies, especially Revenge of the Nerds.
Sure.
16 Candles.
Breakfast Club, 16 Candles.
Well, I was talking about that with Kathleen the other night. The Breakfast Club,
wonderful.
All of those is probably one of the least problematics.
Yeah, oh, sure. Yeah, out of
Breakfast
all of them,
Club
I would agree.
and Some Kind of Wonderful. Those two are probably the least problematic of the 80s teen rom-coms.
I guess Some Kind of Wonderful mixed up with... There's 16 Candles, and then there's the one where they made the ending correct.
Pretty in Pink.
Thank you. Okay. See, you're right there with me. You're my age.
Pretty in Pink is the one that had Ducky, who everybody thought should have been with Molly Ringwald's character, and they sent her off with the other guy.
What's his face? Yeah. The hegemonic masculine guy.
Right.
Instead of her dorky friend.
But then there are all those people that'll tell you that Ducky is problematic because he does have there are some misogynistic, stalkerish type of desperate qualities to Ducky.
I mean, that's the center of all of people of our age, all of our, like, especially teen rom-coms, but any rom-coms, the center of all of them from our era of movies is stalking equals romance. I mean, that's what that is. Every single one of these, like, so-called romantic, I mean,
right.
God, what's the Christmas movie? Love Actually.
Yeah, that was early 2000s though.
No, I know that was a lot later, but still.
I have a soft spot for that movie too, but.
Well, you know, we all have soft spots for these movies, but if you look at them with a clear head, you go, "Wow."
Yeah.
Say anything. I mean.
Don't pick on Say Anything. Don't pick on Say Anything.
I'm not picking. Look, okay, I'm going to say this again. I am not calling out these tropes in order that you need to hate this stuff. I just need everyone to be clear that when he lifts up that boombox, as far as he knows, now we know better because we follow her point of view as well. We know that she really wants him. We know that she is sad and that it's her father that's making her reject the guy, right? He doesn't know that. All he knows is that she's told him to take off and never talk to her again. That's all he knows. He can't possibly know that she really wants him. So he stands outside her window and plays the song that they lost their virginities to.
Right.
That's fucking creepy. I'm sorry. And it's completely romantic and I love it and it's great. But do you know what I'm saying? Like, it's really not okay. And I love it. And so, you know.
Okay. So I guess at some point what we need to do is, at least for the audience, since there is no essay to go back to, define for them hegemonic masculinity and hypermasculinity, because that really comes into play in this one when we're talking about the nerd.
The nerd, yeah, especially that. So I have a question for you before I define those two terms. Do you feel like, I've noticed that you've repeated this a couple times, and I wasn't really thinking of this as an essential part of this trope. Uh-huh. Do you feel like the nerd pursuing the girl and, you know, playing all the tricks he needs to play to get the girl, do you think that getting the girl in the end is essential to this trope?
I think so because, you know, because the whole point about, particularly when you look at at that adorable misogyny thing. It's all the thing that sets Raj apart from the other guys in The Big Bang Theory is that he never gets the girl.
He's gayer, yeah.
Right. Revenge of the Nerds. All of the guys that are straight in that fraternity of nerds get girls at the end.
Right.
16 Candles. When they wake up in the morning, when the geek wakes up with the cheerleader in the morning, she likes him. She's sober, a bit hungover, but sober, and she kisses him. He gets the girl. Yay.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
You know,
right.
Say Anything. He gets the girl.
Yes. Because of persistence.
Right. Well, let's go even to the least problematic of our favorite ones that we've mentioned so far, Some Kind of Wonderful, which I love because I love Mary Stuart Masterson. She is wonderful. I just love her in general.
And I have a thing for redheads, so I love Eric Stoltz. So there we go.
So, but Eric Stoltz in that is technically a nerd. He's an art nerd. Not quite the pocket protector
automatically nerd.
geek thing. But what's interesting is you actually have two different styles of hegemonic hyper masculinity in that movie. So you have.
Should I define those terms really quick?
Yep.
But pin that because I want you to then go on right after I do that. So
okay.
So hegemonic masculinity is the unattainable ideal of the stereotypical male.
Right.
So basically, I've covered a lot of what that is in my first few tropes. Mm-hmm. So big, muscular, jock, not sensitive, really, really dude bro-y. So all of that unattainable, this unattainable ideal of stereotypical masculinity. That's what hegemonic masculinity is.
James Bond is the ideal hegemonic masculine ideal.
Basically, yeah. And hypermasculinity refers to a series of behaviors that a man will try to do in order to achieve that unachievable hegemonic masculine ideal. Right. So the hypermasculinity is all of the ways that a man will perform his masculinity in an attempt to achieve the hegemonic ideal.
Right.
Is that pretty much making sense?
That makes sense to me.
Sweet. So then go on about Some Kind of Wonderful then. With
Some Kind of Wonderful. Eric Stoltz is the nerd in here. He's an art nerd. He is sensitive. There's no
well, being into arts is something that's not considered part of the hegemonic masculine ideal. Just already.
So and he has no stalkerish characteristics. He doesn't do anything stalkerish. He does not have any hints or suggestions of sexual assault.
Which is really surprising for a movie of that era, isn't it?
Right. He's not aggressive. So here you have Stoltz is playing this sub-male character. He's a geek. He's a nerd. He's an art nerd.
He's a redhead.
Right. And
Sorry, Paul.
And you have the James Spader character who has the girl that he wants. And treats her like shit. He's a misogynist. Right. You can tell it. And he is doing hypermasculinity. He is performing a certain style of masculinity. He is manipulating. He's abusive. He's dominant of what's her name?
What's her face?
I can't remember the actress's name.
Cute pixie haircut. Yeah. All your listeners are like blah 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 into their phones right now.
Right. Hold on. Let me get up the Some Kind of Wonderful page here. I could just go get my DVD.
Some kind of wonderful, yes she is. That's my little when you put on hold, you get the music.
Right.
Some kind
we're keeping the audience in such suspense. Come on, internet. Anyway,
we're going to make up the fact that it's only two of us now. My God.
I know.
It's just our chemistry, Jason.
I know. And nobody else to fill in these gaps when we can't remember shit we should remember because we're old and...
Or to have intellectual monologues that bring us back to topic.
Anyway, so you have James Spader's character who's performing one type of hypermasculinity.
Yes.
And your sub guy, your nerd... who he gets help from is, and I can't remember that other actor's name, but Duncan is the character's name. He's shaved head. His version of hypermasculinity is that leather jacket wearing, shaved head, violent
tough
character,
bad boy,
who's really actually kind of sensitive.
Right.
And whose dad is a security guard at a museum.
Yeah.
Right.
It's just fucking awesome. Okay, I need to see this movie again, by the way.
And so what you have is somebody, Stoltz's character, who is a nerd, who is navigating between two versions of hypermasculinity.
Right.
One of them creepily sensitive, even though they've got the leather jacket and the knife and are always in detention. And the other one, the socially acceptable rich boy version of hypermasculinity.
Yeah,
he's navigating the two of those to get the girl. But the girl, in the end, says, oh, wait a minute. This doesn't work for anything. I'd rather stand on my own. And that's when he realizes that, oh, the nerd girl is his all along.
Right. Yes. Yeah.
So that's why I find it, I think Some Kind of Wonderful might actually be the same era antidote.
The same era antidote
to all of the 80s,
nerd tropes.
Tale of the nerd tropes.
Yeah.
The victorious nerd, maybe that's what we call this, or the sexy nerd, or the
I do like a dorkable misogynist, but I didn't make that up, so I have to call it something else.
You have to call it something else. And also it's a bit different, because the adorable misogynist is really a description of a style of
hypermasculinity
presented of attempting to attain hypermasculinity.
True, it's one of many behaviors.
Whereas a trope implies there's also a story arc or some type of thing applied to it.
Yeah.
So yeah, but yes, I would just like to say how much I love Some Kind of Wonderful.
Oh, it's so good. It's so good. I need to see it again. I think it's actually been since that era since I've seen it, actually.
Really?
Yeah, which is really sad. I just saw John Wick 3 the other day. Holy shit.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, that has nothing to do with this trope.
Leah Thompson. For fuck's sake, Leah Thompson.
Thank you. Okay, right. Thank you. Yes, indeed.
And Duncan was Elias Codius.
That's right.
Yeah. That's right. I mean...
Okay, so here's a question for you. Do you remember the... Oh, yeah. Oh, my God. I need to see this movie again. So, do you remember the Val Kilmer remake? I think it was a 90s remake, late 90s, I believe, of The Saint,
mm-hmm.
the old TV show. Right. So, in that case, what is happening with The Saint? What?
Don't quit.
I'll put a pin in that. You just are freaking out though.
Right, because one of the best movies to fit into this trope, I think we've both overlooked and not done anything with.
Oh, okay. So, so tell me that, and then I'll put a pin in The Saint, and I'll tell you why I think of The Saint. So go ahead.
Although it might actually be more of an antidote trope to it.
Oh.
Real Genius.
Real Genius is totally
because you mentioned Val Kilmer.
Yeah.
And I'm trying to think, because one of the nerds
Weird Science too. That made me think of Weird Science.
Well, Weird Science got mentioned in the adorable misogyny trope.
It did, yeah.
But Real Genius didn't get mentioned in anything, and we've kind of forgot about it. But I don't know that Real Genius has the nerds being misogynistic, because one of the nerds in that trio is a woman. And they aren't putting each other down.
I have to watch it again.
Yeah.
They're not competing. They're not any of them perform. I mean,
just
because it's a female doesn't mean she's not still performing hypermasculinity.
It's a totally isolated nerd cast. There is no jock or hyper masculine thing that they're competing against.
Okay, I need to see
their professor is just I guess the professor is a bit of a hyper masculine nerd, but he's still a nerd. There's nobody in that thing that really.
Oh yeah, well that's a good point. Huh.
And because a lot of the breakthroughs that the group has come from the woman, not the two nerd characters, Val Kilmer and then the other guy who's the child prodigy, basically.
Right. Okay, I need to look at that again.
Yeah. But that's not to say that, a lot of the stuff that we've identified doesn't actually exist out in the world as depictions of nerds.
Well, the reason I thought of this...
embracing certain styles of hypermasculinity in order to get the girl.
And I really did also, I was pretty affected by the analysis of Big Bang Theory too, because just watching all of the intense homophobia and the intense anti-feminine
right.
Attitudes and the very intense bullying that the nerds would all give to each other. Like if any one of them showed any like speck of sensitivity, or they'd make them dress in women's clothing as punishment and all that kind of stuff. Like that's very intense to me, and I can see that happening I can see that reflecting back and forth between real life hazing organizations and the nerd misogynist. But the reason I brought up The Saint was because it seems to me that, I mean, at least in the movie, there's just one particular plot, dramatic build with the one plot. I'm not talking about the TV show, because it's impossible to do that. It's a serial. But the movie, so the Val Kilmer, the Saint character, he's a thief, and he's he puts on various personae to be able to steal whatever he wants.
Right.
To be able to get what he wants, he becomes whatever he needs to become. And so in this case, he becomes a very sensitive, artistic, not a nerd, like stereotype nerd character, but he definitely takes on some of the nerd characteristics, which is being very sensitive, which is being very artistic, which is being more interested in intelligence and like the arts and musical sensitivity and things like that. He's puts that effete. On. He's being effete, yes. Effete and a little bit effeminate, just enough to make him interesting to the main character, who's a woman who he's trying to seduce so he can steal a specific thing that she has.
Right.
So what he is doing in this character in particular, this character is seeing ways to weaponize this nerd character.
Right.
So ways to become sub-male in some ways in order to get what he wants. He knows he can't posture and pose and be a dude bro in order to get close to this woman.
Right.
He knows he has to do other things to get close to her. So it's almost like he very particularly weaponizes this particular nerd sort of sub-male character in order to get close to her to get what he wants. And then she feels utterly betrayed, of course, when she finds out. Spoiler alert. Okay, it's a very old movie, but still. So I find that to be interesting, too. So that's not just the men who are intrinsically nerds, and that's just who they are. It's also possible to take on these attributes and weaponize them, especially when it's a to get the girl kind of situation, like you're saying.
Right, because really one of the things that the trope that you've identified in here and that the notes talked about and what was talked about in the Adorable Misogyny video is, and this is why of the other tropes, this has to have a story arc. Why I asked that original question, tale of a weak sub-male who does what? He gets the girl. He gets the girl by subterfuge, by deceit, because that's the only way he can achieve. Because the woman, and the more attractive the woman, the more the prize. The more that woman becomes a symbol of that person's
prowess,
attainment, ability to live up to the hyper-masculine, hegemonic masculine trait by achieving the girl. So that has to be part of the trope, because one of the things that the trope points out, that was pointed out in the notes as well, is those instances where we talk about sexual assault, which brought up the idea of the bed trick.
Yeah, the bed trick.
Now, this is where that is problematic to me, in a very broad, deep sense, right? Because invariably, the woman that the nerd desires in these stories is not one who should be desired. Does that make sense?
No. Because in a lot of these movies, the comedy comes in from her being out of his league.
Right, out of his league. I fucking hate that.
I know, I fucking hate it too, but that's that's where the comedy comes in, right?
But exactly. This is something that was pointed out to me. So like, yes, there's the bed trick that's going on and stuff like this, but that does not. So, for instance, in 16 Candles, part of the reason that the geek gets away with his supposed sexual assault of Jake's girlfriend that he wants to get rid of is that she is unlikable.
See, I think that her social status as a cheerleader makes her an ultimately desirable.
Makes her desirable as a trophy.
Yes.
Even though as a person she is not likable.
Oh, right. No.
You see what I'm saying?
Nobody's likable though in this. And
the same thing with the Revenge of the Nerds movies.
Right.
Carradine's character goes after the girlfriend of the quarterback.
Who's the prime desirable.
Right. She's
character.
the head cheerleader. So therefore, in the cultural structure of hegemonic masculinity, she is the most desirable woman. But the character in the show is not a likable person.
Right.
Now, that seems as if I'm stepping towards a justification. His deceit in both 16 Candles and Revenge of the Nerds, the deceit to get into her pants is justified. It's not. But I'm also sitting there looking at this old classic, literary trope of the bed trick.
Yeah.
And so if the nerd's goal is to obtain a status symbol to reflect his masculinity.
Right, well put.
And the trophy that he has to achieve is only a shallow trophy. Right? And
I don't think it is though, because we're talking about we're talking about social hierarchies. So as far as these characters are concerned, it's not shallow. That's like the ultimate.
Well, that's the thing.
Achievement.
But in both cases, not in 16 Candles, but in Revenge of the Nerds, he grabs the mask and follows her in, and she initiates, thinking it's her quarterback boyfriend.
Yeah, I think it's her boyfriend.
And doesn't realize that it's Carradine's nerd character until he gets done performing cunnilingus.
Right.
And there's a part of me that thinks, okay, on one hand, yes, sexual assault. She is consenting to sex with someone she doesn't realize she's consenting to sex with. And that's...
Therefore, she's not consenting to sex with that person.
Therefore, she's not consenting to sex with that person. Okay, I understand the logic behind that. Right?
And we're supposed to cheer for the nerd. Oh, yeah, nice job, man. Because he would never have been able to get his face between her legs in any other way.
Other way, except through a classic literary device of the bed trick.
Right.
Now, in the device of the bed trick, as we talked about before, it's always about some lecherous dude who has made a commitment to one woman and has decided to throw her off and pursue another woman. And so to resolve that situation, him being dishonorable.
Yeah.
They say, okay, fine, you can have sex with the woman you desire. He's like, yay! And jumps in bed and bangs the woman that's there, but it's really the woman he was committed to originally.
Yeah.
Right. Wah, wah.
But that's not what we're talking about with the nerd trope, though.
But in the case, at least, of what I'm saying is we have to be kind of careful, or maybe we don't. Maybe we just need to call it assault. But there's...
Why wouldn't we? I mean, in this particular trope, there's all kind, like the old literary bed trick is a little different. For this character trope, it seems like...
Yes, I mean, I can understand that because we have a set up a character at this point who has not shown himself to actually be honorable or worthy, right? He's not a real man. He's been doing the adorable misogyny thing. He's presenting as the better option, but not actually the better option because he's still a misogynist.
Yeah. And he's a sub-male, which means he doesn't get away. I mean, but he's a nice guy.
What if? Let's just flip this thing on its head just a little bit. Let's say that this situation, let's just take that scene in the waterbed room in Revenge of the Nerds, right?
Okay.
what if leading up to that situation, Carradine's character had been a legitimately good guy, pro-feminist, stand up, not a misogynist, whatever. He somehow ends up in this room with that cheerleader who thinks he's someone else.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And he goes down on her. And then when he's done and she's had her orgasm or whatever, and he pops up and she's like, "You're that nerd." And then she's like, "All right, cool." Is that then not sexual assault? Because she's like, oh, no. She ends up with the guy that
still is.
But is it? If
it is.
It in a legal sense, but also there are two parties involved there. There's two ways of perceiving it.
Because she didn't know it was. She didn't know. She didn't give consent. Right. She did not know it was.
But he was really good, and she did like, I would like that again.
That's different.
That's what happens in the movie. He does the thing.
I know.
Even though he's a despicable person, he's really good at the thing, and she's like, "Oh, I guess I do like you."
Well, this is a problem with writing women characters too.
Well, it's a problem. It's a problem with this trope thing in general. It's a problem with the way society views consent.
What that is, pursue her until she says yes. If she says no, she doesn't mean no. That's why I would continue to say no. It is still assault.
And in this case of Revenge of the Nerds, it's eat her pussy until she says yes.
Right. It's a kiss whichever pair of lips until she likes it.
Right, but
doesn't matter which pair.
So, I mean, on one hand, I understand completely. Yes,
So here I would say we're talking about a plot trope as well, which is the pursue her till she says yes. No means yes. And
we're also talking about the bed trick, and this is a different version of a bed trick, which is a swapping of one sexual partner for another, unbeknownst
without one of the partner's knowledge.
Right. So it is still a bed trick. It's not. It's not the same setup as the traditional Shakespearean Renaissance bed trick, but it's still a bed trick.
Yes.
And that's where 16 Candles is really legitimately problematic, because there's no bed trick involved. Right.
Right. That's true. Yeah.
Yeah. She gets drunk, passes out.
That's just take my girlfriend, please.
Is here, take my girlfriend, do whatever you want to her. I could do anything I want to her right now, but I don't want to.
Yeah. Right. Since you're a nerd and you can't get sex any other way, here you go. Have
my slutty cheerleader demanding girlfriend.
Have my passed out girlfriend, because that's the only way.
With the back of her hair chopped off and pose for some pictures with your friends. I'm still not. I have to go back and watch 16 Candles, but I'm not entirely convinced that they had sex. I think they just posed for the pictures, and then that was kind of the extent of it.
I don't remember. That part. I remember a lot of the Molly Ringwald stuff, but I don't remember that part. My recollection is that they did. Well, he did.
Well, I think that there's a strong implication that they did, but I don't know that it's actually explicitly.
No, it's implicit. It's not explicit.
Right. Yeah.
So I would agree. I would agree that we need to excise the neckbeard. I think you're totally right. I think that doesn't belong. At least not side by side with the nerd. That's a completely different thing. And I am starting to see what you mean, that this nerd trope needs to have using tricks to get the girl. That's part of this trope. And the misogyny has everything to do with that as well, and the homophobicness and the anti-feminine
and you're dead
stuff.
right on putting the whole ideas of hegemonic and hypermasculinity into that thing, because that's what's driving the nerd to use his intelligence to trick the woman into.
Yes, and the way he's trying to perform his masculinity, as in direct contrast though with the hegemonic masculine characters that are usually in his movie too. Like we usually get it's usually comedy, and the comedy comes with the contrast of this sub-male as compared to the ultimate male, the hyper male. So all of that are all facets of this particular trope.
Now, I know you want to keep things even and balanced. 7 problematic badass female tropes, 7 toxic masculinity tropes.
7 is a magic number.
But I mean,
Where's the butt? Where's the butt?
Where's the butt? It's in my chair. I don't want, I mean, maybe the neckbeard could be a subcategory of this, or a subtrope, or a cancer. Let's have a trope with a cancer. Because
instead of a branch, it's a
polyp. It's a tumor.
Oh, I like that idea.
This is a
It's not a tumor.
It's not a tumor. It's not a
Speaking of
tumor.
80s movies. Oh, I like that idea. Because we're talking about antidotes to the tropes.
Right.
Why not like cancerous versions too?
And of course there is, because that's kind of what the neckbeard is. It's the way, well, in one of my notes, what did I say?
What did you say?
I said the neckbeard is a less smart dungeon dweller, may or may not be hyper intelligent, and may or may not have right-wing political views. Because when you get into the manosphere,
and always way more directly angry though too.
Yes, that's the thing. The neckbeard is directly angry at women. They feel
the
they've
nerd
been
is trying to play the game still.
Right. The nerd's trying to play the game. He even though he's misogynistic, even though he has misogynistic tendencies, even though he's trying to live up and he's trying through the ways that he is capable of being hypermasculine, trying to still be appealing to women. Whereas the neckbeard is they are openly aggressive, openly violent, openly disdainful, aggressively, almost violently misogynistic. And the neckbeard is the top. Okay, so this nerd trope is toxic in what it forces men to do. But see, the nerd is someone who is toxic kind of by accident. They're toxic because of their desire to achieve something.
They're toxic. Yeah, they're toxic in their hyper masculinity because they're trying so hard to perform their masculinity that they end up being toxic about it.
Right.
Whereas
the neckbeard is purposefully they're embracing toxicity. They are using that toxicity as a means to justify their hatred.
But the nerd does too, though.
Well, like I said, the nerd wants to appeal. The neckbeard does not want to appeal.
Okay, you're right. And if the neckbeard does want to appeal, it's already
a weakness.
So far gone.
If the neckbeard is trying to make themselves appealing to women, they're automatically labeled a beta.
Oh, right, a soy boy.
Right. So that's got to be the difference between these two, because the neckbeard is like, I'm perfect as I am. Why don't women like me? That was the whole basis behind Elliot Rodgers' violence. And that's why they call him the supreme gentleman, because he behaved well around women.
It's all their fault.
So I'm going to kill him.
Whereas
because
the nerd
they aren't fucking me.
Trying to change himself, and they put down other nerds that appear more feminine or whatever, in an attempt to climb that ladder. They're attempting to climb the ladder into the hypermasculine.
Right. The nerds are attempting to use the system to get. They're attempting to operate within the system.
Yeah. Okay. Whereas the neckbeard is like going, "Fuck you! I'm already there.
I'm already fine. Why don't you like me?"
Yeah. Okay. That's absolutely true. You're totally right about that.
And aren't you?
I'm so glad I'm talking about this with you. This is making everything. Yes. Okay. Great.
And this one's going to be a lot more serious than our previous ones on some of this stuff, because the thing is that some of the ideas. One of the things that absolutely stunned me and shocked me, that rattled me, when the Elliot Rodger thing happened in Isla Vista was that there were echoes in his manifesto that sounded like me in my late 20s.
Wow, really?
And, you know, it was like, you know, so I grew up kind of, I've always been this hypersensitive, hyper-aware boy. And I grew up aware of, and this is why I was so fascinated by My Enemy, My Love when I started doing my own research for this thing, the man-hating and ambivalence in women's lives, is that I was very aware of and sensitive to this misandry that was coming, that women were, because women exist in a patriarchal system and because they know and are aware that that power is in an imbalance, they have to cultivate a certain kind of man-hating in order to survive within that patriarchal structure. So men are inept in the home. Men are only concerned about sex. They're brutes. They're abandoners. They're all this other stuff. All of those things are ways of hating men to kind of undercut and make sure that their power does not seem so oppressive, even as they're oppressing these women. That's kind of the way misandry works. And that's why it's something that we don't always talk about or have in language to talk about.
It's a direct sort of counter to misogyny, right?
Right. But it's a way of allowing women to operate within a patriarchal system and not go fucking crazy. So, but I was, as a boy, being always more friendly and acceptable to women, was very aware of that misandry, of that hatred of men. And I took it to heart. And I was like, okay, so, you know, I learned very early on, don't touch a woman unless she wants you to. You know, don't be stalkerish. Don't do this. Don't do all that other stuff. Don't, you know, basically what I learned. Basically what I learned though was an extreme version of it, which is don't let women know you're interested in that all, because they will just think you're a sex obsessed douchebag.
Right. So then how do you?
And then I would sit around and wonder, why don't women seem to be interested in me? Well, it's because I had become so good at appearing to not be interested in women.
Sure.
And so there was a period in my 20s where I hadn't become aware of that yet. And so I was like, I'm not rapey, I'm not assaulty, I'm not lecherous, I'm not stalkery, I'm not all of these horrible things I've heard about men being. Why don't women like me? Well, it wasn't until I got a little bit older, but it's because you act like you don't like women.
Right. Yeah.
And
which is a total catch-22, right? In this patriarchal society, it's like completely catch-22, because you're also your boy self is also right too. Like, how do you flirt with someone?
Right. Where is that line?
Yeah.
Between, you know,
how do you come on to a woman then in that case? Yeah,
without being assaulty. Where's the line? It's hard to tell sometimes, because
that's what we were saying the other day too, that there's going to be a pendulum swing that's going to be really difficult to deal with.
When does asserting your interest in someone become aggressively demanding their attention?
Sure, exactly.
When does that cross? And particularly in a patriarchal society, if you're trying to be sensitive to what women have to endure, that's a really vague, broad, weird line to try to navigate.
Right. Yeah. How do you? Yeah. Exactly.
So that's kind of to me what that says is that this is why the bed trick thing is such a sticking point for me with this trope. Right.
Right. Okay.
Because. And whether
I find
or
that
not
to be interesting, but not super pivotal. I think you're right about the getting the girl bit.
Well, and that's the thing though, is that, you know, as a sub male, because in Revenge of the Nerds we also have a counter to that, because the Carradine character goes after the cheerleader, but Anthony Edwards' character goes after a nerd girl, and he gets her through a different means. He is not using trickery to get her. He's just straight up gets her because of who he is.
It's because she's part of the same cast.
Right. And
social class, whatever.
Right. And so, but the dynamic between Carradine's character and the cheerleader is different. Here you have, and this is why that the difference between sexual assault and a bed trick is kind of something that I'm pivoting around here. Not because I am trying to diminish sexual assault or its thing, but you have a character striving to be taken seriously in a world that does not take him seriously because of his glasses, his scrawny nature, all this other stuff, who desires something that society has told him should be desired. And so he uses his intelligence, the one thing that he has in abundance, to get himself into an opportunity where he can prove to this thing that he desires the most that he is worthy of her attention.
Well, the fact that you're using the word thing is really telling, isn't it?
Yes, it is. Because to me...
Because that's exactly what he is being taught. You're right. He is being taught this thing. This is a thing.
She is a thing. She is a status symbol.
Yep.
Right?
Yeah. She's not a person.
And if you look at her character as she's presented in that movie, she's not really an appealing person.
Well, she's not a person in that movie. She's not a person.
Thing. She only has to be appealing because of the way she looks, which is a function of patriarchy
and her social status.
And her social status.
Yeah.
So within the confines of that, in order to prove his worth, you see where I'm at? It's like,
it's still assault. It's still assault. But that's why that's part of this trope, and that's why the trope is problematic, because that is a part of it, and that is something he has to do to prove it. Like exactly what you're saying. Totally, absolutely agreed.
Right.
But I am also saying that the bed trick in this case is assault, and that he does use his intelligence to get the thing that he is being taught that he needs to have in order to be a real man.
Right.
So in order to be a real man, this nerd has to commit sexual assault.
And that's what makes this trope toxic.
Yeah, exactly. Yep, totally. Solved another cultural problem. Thank you.
Drunk on beer and wine.
And Jenn. Solving more cultural issues.
Yeah.
Only everyone just listened to our podcast. They would totally be fine. And everything would be great.
We'd solve global warming. We'd get Trump out of the White House.
Man, everything would be fine.
Yeah.
No, totally. And that's a great conclusion too. You're absolutely right about that.
I am.
But what? The conclusion, that's a great way to tie it up. Because you're wondering about the difference between the bed switch and the sexual assault. I'm saying there isn't one, but your description of what that nerd had to go through and what he's being taught and why, and the whole trophy idea, and that's totally part of this whole, and you're right, that is exactly what makes it toxic. That's what I mean by you're absolutely right.
The way patriarchy and whatever puts the demands upon the person to live up to the hegemonic idea of masculinity, which
is not something you can live up to. No one can. And so this is what he resorts to.
Do we have a trope that has to do with just big penises?
I think Go Big or Go Home has a little bit to do with that.
Well, we did not talk enough about it then.
We didn't talk enough about big penises, but I do talk about it in the article. I mentioned it as part of the whole, you need to be very, very big. And there's the whole thing about penis size paranoia, and I have a whole nother article that I want to write.
I think when you do the Go Big or Go Home and you get to the penis thing, you really need to go big.
Or go home.
Just go big.
Just go big. Well, and I actually mentioned this too, which I actually want to write an entire another article about the whole comedy of the kicking of the nuts. And just how Pop Culture Detective does another thing that's a little bit heavier and harder to watch. It's about the use of sexual assault against men as comedy. So it's actually a really, really great video, but it's a little bit hard to watch but it talks about that. And so I have this article idea called "Where Have All the Nut Kicks Gone," which is about how which is the change, which is the change in attitude towards groin kicks as comedy, as slapstick comedy, you know?
Right.
And it's kind of sort of changed. And actually, Paul and I were talking about this recently about ever since the sort of absurdist, sort of almost Dada comedy of Big Lebowski. The whole like castration fear and all that kind of stuff, like this, all this amazing, cool shit to talk about that. But that's where the big penis part comes in, I would say, is through the go big or go home. The big penis part is part of that. You need to be big everywhere. If you're a big dude with muscles with a tiny dick, then that's funny and that's not man enough.
Well, that's what happens when you take too many steroids. Is you're big everywhere, but your dingus.
But that's reality.
And how can you tie all of that stuff about the nut kick into Idiocracy, which the longest running show in the world of Idiocracy was Ow My Balls?
Yeah, totally. Yeah, exactly. I don't know. That's another cultural thing that I'm very interested to delve into, as it were. But
Idiocracy or Ow My Balls? Or both.
Where have all the nut kicks gone?
Where have all the ow my balls? Yeah.
Cock Puncher. Remember the Cock Puncher trailer?
Yeah, you showed me the trailer. I saw the trailer.
I love Cock Puncher. I showed it to my students. They were like, "Okay, A, what movie is this from? And B, please tell me this is a real movie." I'm like, I really wish Cock Puncher were real. It's not.
Yeah. Well, that's how Machete got made. Was that they did the trailer for that Grindhouse thing.
Yeah,
and everybody's like, that has to be a movie, and so they went out and made it. Machete.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But anyway, so
okay.
But
the thing is the thing, and we've figured out the trope. We've ironed out. We've shed the neck beard as a cancer.
Shave your neck.
Shave your neck. Get the fuck out of your mom's basement. Quit standing there in public, waving a Nazi flag and wearing a swastika, looking at liberals going, "I'm not the Nazi, you're the Nazi." Which is basically what Dinesh D'Souza did the other day. Did you see his fucking goddamn trope thing he tried to put on the thing? He paired Greta Thunberg to the Nazi propaganda poster. And I was like,
and she's just like, really? Even she's just like, you know what?
Yeah, and because he wrote that it wasn't D'Souza, it was some other fucking douche nozzle that wrote some book saying that Nazism was actually a leftist political ideal. And it's like, really? You think that because National Socialist Party of Germany had socialist in it, it's therefore a leftist ideal just because socialism's on the left, then I guess you think buffaloes really do have wings? All right, we're done. Goodbye, everybody. Be sure to get the wings off the buffaloes. The Outrider podcast is orchestrated by me, Jason Quinn Malott, and audio production magic is performed by Heather Ann Eden. You can find the show online at jquinnmalott.com, and if you would, please hop on iTunes and give us a rating. We'll be back later in 2020 with more mini-series, live shows, and one-on-one conversations with writers, editors, and publishers. Thanks for listening.